Good evening, everybody. I'm Caleb Colquitt, the head coach of esports here at Faulkner University, and we have a very special guest that's joining us for our live stream tonight. We're able to get a representative from the charity that we're going to be benefiting tonight, that all the proceeds are going directly to them. 100% of the proceeds are going that way, so there's no administrative cost or anything. All of your money goes to help this charity, and that is, of course, Operation Underground Railroad. They are an organization that assists with helping to stop sex trafficking around the world. And tonight we have Tyson Wright, who is the program manager of the education department there at O.U.R. So we're going to go ahead and bring him in. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Tyson.
Happy to be here and grateful for the opportunity to join in this virtual setting.
Yeah, I mean, technology really is amazing that we're able to do this, because you were just telling me you guys are actually based off of Utah, but we're still able to help y'all tonight through the magic of technology.
Yeah, it is great. It brings us together and allows for these types of opportunities and definitely creates accessibility.
For sure, for sure. So I wanted to go ahead, and I know a lot of hosts really enjoy sort of introducing their guest and try to give their backstory, but really I kind of prefer that the guests themselves do that. And so before we get into the specifics of O.U.R., could you just kind of give us a little bit about your background and what got you interested in doing this work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I like that idea of letting us introduce and to say it instead of just reading a bio. But I've been connected with O.U.R. since about 2015, and I started in a volunteer capacity. I volunteered in my community, raising awareness about human trafficking, what O.U.R. was doing, and did that for a number of years, for about 6 years actually, just being connected to the organization in a volunteer capacity. And then for the last 2 years, I've been an employee of O.U.R. in a few different capacities. But what very first got me connected was hearing about what O.U.R. is doing, the way that they're doing it, and the impact that they're having. It just sucked me in right from the beginning, and I couldn't not help. I just had to get involved, and grateful for the chance, the opportunity to be involved now in the education department. Specifically, what we do with inside O.U.R. is providing education and training to the groups that we work with, law enforcement, aftercare, and we'll talk more about these types of things, but trying to build the capacity of the different systems that exist, of groups, organizations that are out there fighting human trafficking.
All right, so that actually is a pretty good segue into what we're going to talk about next anyway. So I wanted to ask you, what exactly is our Underground Railroad, and what do y'all do? What's the mission?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit organization that our mission statement is that our goal is to end child sex trafficking and exploitation. And so we focus and narrow into that certain type of human trafficking that exists, which is child sex trafficking. Globally, there's a few different types of human trafficking that are defined on a legal standpoint, which are labor and sex trafficking. And we hone in even more, narrow down to child sex trafficking. And we do that primarily through supporting law enforcement agencies around the globe and here in the United States as well, in fighting human trafficking, in increasing their ability and resources to take this, terrible scourge on. And we do that in a number of different ways, but what we're probably most well known for, and where we offer our most support, is through identifying traffickers, identifying survivors or victims of human trafficking, and then working with law enforcement to set up an operation to go in and to rescue those individuals, children specifically, who are caught in human trafficking. And we've been doing this since 2013. Most of our operators and individuals who participate on that side come from a law enforcement background, many of them with a federal background with HSI or CIA ties, and doing this type of work on a federal level, and then have retired from that and now are here with O.U.R. offering that resource and knowledge to different law enforcement agencies around the globe. But it doesn't stop there. Obviously, once an individual has been rescued, they've got a big hill in front of them, a lot of hurdles to overcome in that healing process. So we have our aftercare program, which supports those survivors on their healing journey, as we call it, helping them get whatever they need to kind of progress forward. That could be medical help, that could be mental health therapy, that could be resources and access to education, getting back to school and learning and progressing forward, getting a high school degree or a university degree, an advanced education degree, or even as something as simple as technical college or something like that, where it gives them some technical skills. We support survivors as they progress forward in processing what they've gone through and helping them kind of move forward in life. And then finally, like I mentioned a little bit before, the education aspect. We understand that rescues aren't the answer to this global problem because of the levels that it is, and prevention and education are needed as well. So we have a number of programs that are geared towards that prevention education, trying to break that cycle earlier on so that hopefully, an individual doesn't ever have to be rescued.
Right. Well, I mean, it sounds like a much more whole inclusive process that you have there, which I really appreciate for a couple of reasons. First of all, when it comes to just creating an environment where sex trafficking can't thrive, because it's important to do the rescues, of course, but you also want to educate the general populace so that it makes y'all's job easier on the other end, prevention, as opposed to just trying to provide a rescue. And then, as somebody who I don't have a ton of experience with this, honestly, but there are a handful of people that I was close with that have been affected by sexual abuse or rape, and I mean that's just like a one-off occurrence, and it can completely change their life. So I can't imagine what this does to people that have had this done to them over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's that complex trauma that exists in those survivors of human trafficking, and in many cases, other types of sexual abuse or physical abuse that exist. It does a lot to that individual, and because of the way our bodies work and our brains work, so much of that is outside of their control. They're reactions that our bodies have,
Mhm.
and it takes a lot of complex work and professionals who know what they're doing to help that individual move forward. And ultimately that's what it's really all about. We rescue individuals, we get them out of that situation, we support in arresting the traffickers, but at the end of the day, it's so that individual can progress forward and that they can move forward in life. And so that's a big part of what we do is helping those individuals move forward by, again, trying to build the systems that can support those individuals.
So one thing that I wanted to talk to you about too is that, generally speaking, when you talk about slavery, that especially in the minds of an American, but I think pretty much nationwide or worldwide, it sort of conjures up this idea of something that happened way back in the distant past in ancient times, that kind of thing. Or even if you think about it a little bit more modernly, like American slavery or the Western slave trade, that's still has been pretty much abolished for the past 150 years. There's nobody alive that even remembers that. But with the work that you guys are doing, y'all essentially are here because that's not the case. So, could you talk a little bit to that? What the state of slavery is in the world today?
Yeah, it is one of those things that, we, especially here in the US, we hear the term slavery and we go back to that, Civil War 1800 period of the transatlantic slave industry and that trade that was happening. And that was a terrible piece and awful of what was happening in those times. And there were some, amazing individuals who were able to work towards that ending. And our name is a clear aspect of how we kind of pay homage to those individuals and try to learn from them. The name Operation Underground Railroad was not just by coincidence or accident, but our founder, Tim Ballard, is a lover of history and chose that name specifically because of the work that those individuals before with the Underground Railroad were able to do and the way that they went about abolishing slavery as it existed before. And so nowadays, most people in a lot of circles will refer to human trafficking as modern day slavery because of the aspects of labor trafficking. That's an individual being forced to work. And that's exactly what slavery was in that transatlantic trade time period, is someone being forced. to work and not having rights and all of that. And so that's a big aspect of why it gets that name.
Mhm.
And, under that umbrella and referring to that, slavery is not gone in the world. The latest estimates to come out in the last year estimate that it's 49 million individuals caught in some form of human trafficking at this very given moment around the globe. Now that includes labor trafficking, that includes sex trafficking, and then even within those two, there's other types that breaks down, like domestic servitude and forced marriage and things like that kind of fall under this umbrella. But it's a global problem that most people say is larger than it's ever been in the world if we're looking on a global scale. And it's an aspect that exists everywhere in the world. There's nowhere that's exempt to it. It's not just in far off countries. It's not just in those third world areas that we most of the time probably go to when we think about slavery or human trafficking. But it happens here in the United States as well. Every state has identified, investigated, prosecuted, convicted human trafficking cases. It's happening all over the place. And but now it's more subtle. It can be less easy to identify than that transatlantic slave industry that maybe had some more in your face kind of tall tale signs of it. It's more kind of covert and less noticeable because that's how the criminals want it to be. They don't want to be noticed. They don't want to be found. And so it can be harder to identify sometimes, for the everyday individual. But it's just as big as it ever was. If you're, and referring to it as modern day slavery and identifying back to some of those aspects of maybe the transatlantic slavery industry.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that number you gave, 49 million, that's actually more than the entire 400 years of the Atlantic slave trade combined. So even if you were to take all of it, that still would be a larger number of slaves that are alive today than were back then. So it really is a problem, and that's part of the reason that we're putting on this charity and looking for donations this evening is because of that. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because of course it's easier to talk about it just because I'm a stats guy, I'm a numbers guy, I like to look at things at the meta. But let's get a little bit more personal. Can you share maybe some stories of some individuals that O.U.R has helped out?
Yeah, we always love to share the stories about the work we're doing and specifically those individuals. And we love to focus on, where they've come, but also in sharing their stories, we can learn a lot that can help keep us safe, but also become more informed and help us to identify it better, to protect ourselves and our loved ones better, and just overall generally be informed on the topic. And there's a couple stories that come to mind to me that kind of highlight some of those aspects of the process that the predators or traffickers were utilizing, and then how the individuals or communities progressed. And one that's currently ongoing, has a long story connected to it. And I'll briefly talk about the beginning stages, but really focus on the latter stages of it. But in the early days of the war in Ukraine, we saw that there was a lot of individuals who were vulnerable to trafficking. When there's a lot of individuals who are displaced, like happened with the war there is going on currently, they're forced out of their house, they're trying to survive, find shelter, find food, just trying to live. And that creates an opportunity for predators and traffickers to come in and fill that need. Well, from some work we were doing in Ukraine, helping some individuals get out and find safe locations, we were ultimately, asked to help on a case from the Netherlands that led us to a predator who had fled the Netherlands and ended up in Mexico and was exploiting children there. And we have a great relationship with Mexico. So we, at the request of the Netherlands, went down, identified where this gentleman was, and helped to arrest him. The Mexican law enforcement came around and arrested him and extradited him back to the Netherlands, where he's actually standing trial right now, which is great. But that wasn't the end of it. We found that his connections and what he was doing there in Mexico actually led down into Ecuador. And we have some great connections with Ecuador. So we went down there to investigate some of the leads that came from it. And one of these leads was that him and some buddies and fellow traffickers had set up in a community there a hotel that was a brothel, and individuals could come and they could book a stay. It was on most of the popular booking sites that an individual would go to find a motel or hotel. And one of the amenities that was there was children were available. The kids would be available for any guests at the hotel if they wanted to come and to rape a child or molest a child. Kids would be available. And so we worked with Ecuador law enforcement, identified where this was happening, set up some surveillance, identified the traffickers and that there were children there, went in, made the arrests, and rescued these children who were being exploited. And kind of as the dust settled from that, we realized that some of the other details that were part of this case, and they kind of highlight the way that the traffickers were able to do this. Mm-hmm. And this small community had been affected 6 years ago by an earthquake that happened, and it knocked out their water supply. And they still to this day don't have running water in this community. So it kind of gives you an idea of where this community is at on a poverty level,
right?
Which poverty is the #1 vulnerability that traffickers will exploit. They'll come in and they'll find a group or an individual who's in poverty, trying to survive, and they'll look to fill that need. And what this group did was they went into this community, they set up their hotel, but in connection, they also set up a community food kitchen. And they provided meals to the community. And anyone in the community could come and get a meal, 1 meal a day for free. And the community loved it because, again, they're in poverty. They're trying to find food. They're just trying to live. And these traffickers came in and they filled that need. Well, in time, the traffickers turned that narrative and story from this is just for free to here's how you need to repay us, for all the food that we've given you. And if you want to continue to get food, is you need to be able to let us, have your kids for our guests in our hotel to rape and to molest. And because of that need, some of the parents were manipulated and said, yeah, okay, you can do that as long as we can continue to get food. Or they would drug the children in the food and then take them into the hotel, and the kids would come out later, hours later, not knowing what happened. And, we saw that this was happening and that this vulnerability was being exploited. And we took that away, and we didn't want to then just create this vulnerability again. So we're continuing to work with that community. We're still running that food kitchen or facilitating for that food kitchen to exist and to move forward to provide food, because for many of the children and women in this community, this was the only meal that they were getting in the day was from this kitchen. But it's exciting to see that this community isn't just expecting a free handout. And we now have this kitchens being run by community members. They've come together. They've said, hey, we want to be a part of this solution and moving forward. And so every week there's women who sign up and come and cook meals and serve meals to over 300 children a day who come and get a meal from this kitchen. And now they've said, hey, let's use this place, this community center, to build our community and increase their knowledge and understanding. So we're supporting in education programs there to help them identify how traffickers exploit individuals. But beyond that, trying to increase their education accessibility by offering reading and literacy programs that are being, again, run by the community members. And it's really cool to see that this community didn't let what happened to them and the narrative there become their story. It's part of what's happened to them. It's part of, what they have to go through. And, individuals who are exploited will deal with that trauma and learn how to process it for the rest of their lives. But they're taking control of their future and saying, we want to be part of that solution moving forward. And that's one of the most beneficial and kind of fulfilling parts of this job as an individual from our side, is being able to see that most of the time that's how it goes, is these individuals, they come out of these horrific situations where they've been exploited for years, many of them, and they turn it into hope, and they turn it into a future as they define that narrative and that story moving forward. And it's really just a cool piece to get the opportunity to be a part of.
Yeah, I really appreciate that story, and to be honest, it's kind of difficult to hear, to think about somebody offering something seemingly out of the goodness of their heart and being charitable and using that as a cover to hook people into actually exploiting them. It's really terrible to hear that, and I know that we didn't plan this. I was just asking that question. I had no idea what you were going to answer. The fact that there was a Ukrainian connection was really interesting, because I'm actually a missionary to Ukraine. I've been over there many times. I've been doing that for the past 4 years, and so our last live stream, actually, our last charity live stream, was specifically to benefit the refugees of the Ukrainian war. So
Oh yeah.
appreciate that you guys were doing that, and more importantly, that you were able to sort of make sure that this doesn't happen again by helping fulfill that need that the traffickers were trying to exploit.
Yeah. Yeah, so often that's the case, is that vulnerability. And for us here in the United States, poverty is not as prevalent. It does
Mm-hmm.
exist, but it's not as prevalent.
Right.
But we have a lot of those same needs that are just part of being a human, right? Like, we all need a shelter and
Right.
food, and for the most part that's met. But we all have the needs of, connection and community and relationship and belonging. And those are exploited just as often by predators or traffickers, as they look to find an individual who maybe has been marginalized, or who feels disconnected, or like they're all alone, or they don't have that support system, and they're looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And predators and traffickers are sneaky, they're smart, and they can identify those individuals, and then they come in as the nicest person in the world. They want to be the friend. They want to be that love. They want to be that connection, build that relationship. And they do that. And they'll work at that for as long as they feel like they need to. And then one day they'll turn that relationship, and they'll start to exploit once they feel like they have some sort of aspect to control of those individuals. And so it happens here in the United States, just as often. It might look a little bit different in how it's happening,
Mm-hmm.
but the technique and tactic that a lot of these predators are using is very similar, of identifying a vulnerability, a need that we all have just because we're humans, no fault of our own. And they'll fill it, they'll build that relationship, and then they'll exploit.
So one of the things that I've noticed too, because I back before I was the head coach of the esports team, I was actually doing talk radio and news. So I have a little bit of background in this. I know that this stuff does go on here in Central Alabama, in the local area that we're at. I know that I've covered several stories about that. Do you have any information about some of this child sex trafficking that would be going on here in the state of Alabama? I don't know if you might just not be aware of that, but do you have anything that might pertain to some of our local viewers?
Yeah. And just like I mentioned earlier, this happens everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of times we will put it in our head that it's a far off problem. Um, and sometimes I think that's kind of a defense mechanism that we have, that it's easier to maybe accept that it exists by saying it just exists somewhere else. It doesn't
Right.
exist here. I can accept it exists, but just not in my community.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, a couple of years ago, there was a survey that went out, and it was surveying on a lot of different aspects, but one of them was human trafficking. And it asked individuals, do you believe that human trafficking happens? And 70% of the respondents said, yes, I believe it happens. Then they asked a follow-up question of, do you believe it happens in your community? And that percentage dropped all the way down to 23%, said, yes, it happens in my community. Most people don't think it happens in their area, but it
Right.
does. And in the United States, we have a human trafficking hotline. It's run by the Polaris Project, is another NGO and nonprofit in this field. And they focus on collecting statistics and informing on evidence-based programs and whatnot. But they collect all the reports that come in through their hotline, and they issue a lot of statistics. And they break this down by state. And so I was just looking this up, and in 2021, they're usually about a year behind, but in 2021, they had 80 identified cases in Alabama alone, 80 cases. They received over 285 reports, but 80 were confirmed cases, and that affected 216 victims. So as you can see, most cases involve multiple victims. And so that's 216 individuals in 2021 alone who are being affected there. The most common type that they've identified is sex trafficking there in Alabama. And most of that's being done in the pornography industry. Individuals being forced to create pornography in some way or another, videos or images or live streams of some sort is one of the most common. Then you have, hotels and home-based kind of industries where individuals are going and raping or purchasing an individual for sex. Labor trafficking does happen, but those are just some of the statistics that I've found there. And we've supported law enforcement there in Alabama with grants for software and for training. And so, law enforcement is aware of it and actively, trying to combat it there as well. And we've had the privilege and honor of supporting some law enforcement offices there in Alabama specifically.
Yeah, I actually used to work in a building with the U.S. Marshal's office here in Montgomery, and so I know that they worked. I don't know about y'all specifically, but I know that they worked with some organizations, and there would be times where I would be coming in for the morning broadcast, and they would be out there at like 5:30, 6 a.m., full SWAT gear, ready to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a real problem. One of the things I wanted to ask you about too, because I know that this affects us as a country as a whole, and probably more so the places in the South, like most of our audience is probably in. Has the border crisis, the recent surge in border crossings, has that been an issue for y'all?
Yeah, it does create a number of problems, especially in a couple areas. Number one, unaccompanied minors. They're coming to the border at higher and higher levels, and some of that is due to some of the policies that we do have in place that almost incentivize an unaccompanied minor coming, or a trafficker facilitating an unaccompanied minor, or even an accompanied minor in coming to the border. And with some of the policies that they, even if they're caught illegally crossing, that they get to stay here in the United States, wait for a hearing to happen. That creates some of the again, incentive for a trafficker to participate in human smuggling, which is what that is
Right.
Coming across the border, bringing people. That's human smuggling. But a lot of times that'll cross over into human trafficking as the ends or the means of why they're smuggling an individual here into the United States.
Right.
The United States is one of the demand destination locations for this, because we participate in this type of industry more than any other country in the world. We participate in the sexual abuse of children in the travel industry more than anyone else. Oftentimes it's called sex tourism. We house and watch more CSAM, child sexual abuse material. It used to be called child pornography, but we house more of that in the US, and we consume more of it than anywhere else in the world. And because of this, that demand's there. And so it is a destination country. And some of the policies that are in place at the border right now incentivize getting minors into the United States through a few different routes or means, but then they're here and available to be trafficked inside the United States.
So, with all of that being said, and how it affects some of the people very close around us in our community, I wanted you to get a little bit more specific on what the funds that are either raised tonight or at other times when you receive donations, because it's possible somebody's watching this after our particular campaign has ended. So if they're watching it on recording, if they were to donate to your organization, what exactly do you use those funds for? What does that go to help the victims? How much of it goes to the education programs that you've talked about, or the aftercare? Like, give us a little bit of a breakdown about what those donations would be used for.
Yeah. So we take every donation and piece very seriously, and we call them sacred funds. Often individuals here will refer to them because they're more than $1. they represent a commitment from whoever's donated them, and all the effort that it took to earn that dollar, and then the decision to donate it to us. But it also represents the opportunity to rescue and support a survivor. And so we oftentimes refer to them as sacred funds and try to treat them that way. The majority of our funds are going to go to those two areas of law enforcement support for rescuing and interventions, undercover operations, supporting law enforcement agencies through grants for training and resources, software, so that they can fight human trafficking. That's one of our biggest spends in our organization. Right behind that on the heels is our aftercare, supporting those survivors as they've coming out of those situations and progressing forward in life. Those are our two main areas that we support. Then we obviously have the education aspects and supporting on that end. And that's growing and becoming a more prevalent part of what we're doing. But we started as a law enforcement support organization, so that's our biggest place. And so those would be some of the areas. Another big area that we do have is a piece of our organization called Children Need Families. And we've understood and identified that a vulnerable population is children who are in orphanages and who are awaiting adoptions. In a lot of places around the world, there are great orphanages and they're doing amazing work and they're supporting these children, but they don't have the funding for long-term care. And so obviously they're going to graduate and leave the program at the most at 18. But in a lot of places in the world, they are pushed out of orphanages and funding ends at the age of 14. And so there's a lot of kids who are being put out on the streets in a vulnerable situation where they're looking to survive at a young age. And so through Children Need Families, we fund adoptions. We're not an adoption agency, but we provide grants to individuals who are going through the adoption process, who are working with an adoption agency, and we help to cover one of the biggest hurdles of adoptions, which is the funding aspect. So that's another piece of what we do. Our goal is that 85% of all donation value that comes in, so for every dollar, 85 cents goes towards our mission. One of those aspects that I just mentioned. Now, every nonprofit's going to have the overhead in that aspect. We try to keep that at only 15% of our overall costs. And most years we're right in there. We rarely dip below 80% of funds that go towards our mission in supporting the rescue and aftercare of individuals.
Well, I appreciate that you guys take such concern to try to make sure you get the most out of people's donations, because I talk to people a lot about this, and especially depending on what circles you're running in, if you're talking about political issues, sometimes you run into people that talk about like how there's this sort of righteous moral indignation, and there should be. I'm not saying that this is incorrect, about how if you were a person that was alive in the 1800s, that they would have been somebody that opposed slavery and worked on the Underground Railroad and was an abolitionist. But the thing is, they don't realize this is still going on today. This is a fight that is still happening. And you have the opportunity, and I actually do, I mean, as much as I hate the fact that this is necessary, I do see it as a blessing that we have the opportunity to be an abolitionist today. And so that's one of the reasons that we wanted to do this charity to benefit y'all, is because we believe that that is something that people can do today. And I would encourage the people that are listening to give a donation. That's a big part of that. Is to be able to, I'm challenging them to be a modern day abolitionist and do your part to fight slavery right now.
Yeah, and it is a huge piece and something, again, sadly exists, but there's routes to be a part of the solution as well. And we have a ton of opportunities and ways to get involved on our website, OURrescue.org. And you can donate, you can give time, you can do something as simple as just educating yourself and individuals around you as to the realities of human trafficking today. Can go a long ways to dispelling some of the myths and keeping yourself and those you care about, your kids, safe. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, and we are a nonprofit and run completely on donations. We appreciate any of that comes our way, and there's different ways to do that can be found on our site.
One thing that I try to ask all of my guests at the end, because I can't think of everything. So is there anything that maybe I wouldn't have thought?
Is it recording?
Yes, it's recording.
Oh, it is. Okay, sorry. It didn't show on my end, so.
Oh, so I'm actually recording through a separate
Oh,
software,
okay.
so
Okay.
that's why it doesn't show up. Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
no,
Sorry to interrupt. Now I go again.
you're good. You're good. All right. So Tyson, one of the things that I always do with any guest that I have, because I can't think of everything, and so I always ask them, is there anything that I wouldn't have thought to ask that you would like the audience to know?
That's a great question. And I think one thing that I would mention, we've talked a lot about um, some of the aspects of human trafficking, what it looks like, and just a few last points maybe that I'll point out that break down some of the maybe myths that exist around human trafficking. Again, to better help us understand the realities of it and where the vulnerabilities and risks really are. Number one is oftentimes when we hear human trafficking, we hone in on that second word and we think of trafficking, we think of movement, we think of individuals being abducted and taken to another place and locked in a cage and sold in that situation. And that does happen. It does exist in some places, but that's the least common type of way an individual is brought into human trafficking and how they're kept inside human trafficking. Here in the United States and globally, the statistics are very similar, is that the relationship between the trafficker and the victim, 40% of the time is a family member. It's a parent, it's an aunt, it's an uncle, it's a grandparent, it's a sibling, 40% of the time. 39% of the time, that relationship is an intimate partner, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a fiance, is the next most common. So you have about 80% of the time that this is happening. This is an individual that survivor knows in some way or capacity, and they're manipulating through, this is what we do in our family or in our relationship, or an abusive type of maintaining control through what we call coercion, or fraud. That's more common and happens more often. The next most common misconception as well is that this is a problem, again, outside of the United States or even within the United States, that it's people being brought in. And we talked about the border, and it is a big problem. There's issues that exist there. But of identified cases, 85% of the time, it's domestic trafficking. It's a citizen of the United States being trafficked in the United States. 57% of the time, they're being trafficked in their own community, out of their own house, many times with children. And these kids are going to school. They're going to the doctor. They're playing with their friends. They're living what might look like an ordinary life from the outside, but they're being trafficked at certain aspects of this. And certain days, they're being sold for sex right in their own community. And this happens very often. Also, the avenue and location that this grooming and manipulation is happening by those strangers in that other 20% of the time, where it's not someone they know, is online. More and more, we're living in an online world, and predators aren't dumb, like I've said before on this, and they know that if they want to find these potential victims and these individuals to manipulate, they need to go where those kids and those individuals are. And so they're going there. They're going to the social media apps. They're going into gaming areas. Most games nowadays have some sort of communication aspect.
Yeah.
You have a chat, or you can talk to each other, audibly. There's some sort of connectivity that's happening there. And to be honest, that's why most people play a lot of the games that they're playing today, and that they're going to these places, is connectivity. It's a place that you can find people who you relate to, who have common interests as you do. It's a wonderful thing, right? Like
right. I mean, that's one of the things that draws a lot of people into esports and video games in general, is there is that community aspect of it.
Exactly. And it's there, and it's wonderful. I mean, you can get online and you can interact and play with people globally, right? And you can build relationships, and you can come back and you build friendships and that things. There's a lot of great aspects. It's also given a number of individuals who maybe have, some of that social anxiety and connecting with people,
Sure.
in their community, at their school, it given them an outlet to be able to do that. There's a lot of positives. But with that, predators are manipulating that space and they're coming into it. And they have a few advantages on their side. Number one, they can be whoever they want online. They can create fake profiles. They can communicate in ways that make people think they're kids. They're a young boy, they're a young girl. They can be whoever they want to be online. And there's very limited ways of verifying that and figuring out who it is. They also have time. There's no pressure in building these relationships. You think of someone trying to do it in person, and there's more limited opportunities to be in the presence of that individual they're trying to manipulate. But online, most of us are like clockwork. We come back at the exact same times every day. We spend the same amount of time online every single day. Studies that have recently come out suggest that kids under the age of 18 spend 8 hours a day in front of a screen. There's a lot of time that we're spending here.
Yeah.
And predators know that. And so that's why they're going to these spaces, because they can be whoever they want. They can take their time in these spaces. In some cases that we've seen predators doing this grooming, is what it's called, building this relationship, understanding the individual over the course of months, 6 months in some cases. They're not being rushed. They're sometimes coming after individuals with multiple profiles at the same time. They'll identify a kid and they'll approach him as maybe a teenage boy the same age, or a teenage girl the same age, a boy or girl a little older or younger, and trying to build these relationships with multiple accounts at the same time, trying to learn about them and understand, their needs. And, we come into these online digital spaces as humans. And again, tying it back to those needs that we have as humans. We're coming into this space to connect, to build relationship, to feel longing and belonging, to a community. And predators are still trying to fill that need. They'll identify individuals who feel lonely, who feel lost, who feel like maybe people don't understand them and don't connect with them. All those same things that we talked about earlier, they're just doing in a digital world. And so often individuals, but especially kids, are unaware, and they don't realize it until it's too late, until that individual, that predator, has something that they can manipulate. And sometimes that might be, they convince the kid that they're a boyfriend-girlfriend type relationship. And then that kid sends some images, some nude images or videos or something. And then that predator has control over them. And they'll manipulate, and they'll say, unless you send me more, I'm going to, tell your parents, or I'm going to send this to everyone I know. I'm going to make this public. And the kid feels guilty. The kid feels trapped in that situation. So they feel, well, I'll just send some more and it'll be over. But that's the end of, it's not over. That predator might take a step back for a few weeks, but then they're going to come again and ask for more and keep that kid trapped. And that's a space we're seeing more and more these days, is individuals, especially children, being exploited and solicited in an online and digital space. Let that be social media, games, chats and forums that are out there. And it's a place that we need to be aware that this is happening, and try to educate ourselves to some of the tactics that predators are using, the vulnerabilities that exist within inside of us, so that we can be safe, even in a digital world.
Well, for the longest time, because I've been a gamer since very early on in the gaming community, my first console was, I guess it would have been third gen. So like I go pretty far back. And there was a time where, of course, parents have always been concerned about the content their kids are consuming, and should. But there was a kind of a general idea, as long as you got a certain kind of game or was paying attention to the label, that your kids were safe. But I mean, again, just coming at this, trying to think in the way that they could be exploited. If I were a predator and I were going after kids, I wouldn't go on the online community for an M-rated game. I would be going after something more like Minecraft or Fortnite.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
that I mean that would be where the vulnerable kids that you would be trying to exploit would go. And so I do appreciate that, because parents, you need to be. I'm not saying don't let them play the games, because obviously, like, I'm a big advocate for that, and like you said, there's a lot of good that comes with that. I'm just saying, keep a close eye on what they're doing there, and make sure the people they are communicating with are safe for them to talk to.
Yeah, and that's the biggest piece. And I come from that right there with you is we don't have to just say that inherently this is an evil area of life and we need to,
Sure, yeah,
all move to Pennsylvania and become Amish. Like, that's not the solution to this answer.
right,
There's a lot of benefits, but we need to understand the risks that come with it. I, like you, I remember growing up and playing video games. It was a huge piece of my life growing up.
hmm,
And, some of those beginning pieces, you all you had to learn, worry about was the rating on the game, right?
hmm,
And there wasn't that connectivity. And then we came to the point of, for me, it was Xbox and Halo, and we could finally connect, but it was with a cord, right? And I
right,
could play with my friends, and we'd all bring our Xboxes and link up with Ethernet, and there were 16 of us playing, and
right.
that was
Land party,
but I knew all 16 people, right? And
right.
they were in the house. They could only be as far as the line could go.
Mm-hmm.
And now we blossom to, you have games where there's thousands of people who are playing at the same time, and not all of those individuals are there just playing the game.
Yeah.
There's predators who have come into that space and who are living in that space and trying to exploit. And so, as parents and as children, we all need to understand that reality, and then the risks and how predators are doing it, so that we can be safe in those spaces. Not that we need to shut out all of these things of our lives. I'm right there with you on that, is that that's not the solution to this problem. Is we just need to learn how to live safely in that space and understand what predators are doing, what traffickers are doing in that space, and how to keep ourselves safe. The problem as a parent is there's so many avenues now,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's really any video game has it. Even any app really that you download has it. I downloaded an app the other day for my daughter who's 4 years old, and it's a coloring book app. And she clicks the squares and it colors it a certain color. From my standpoint, it's like, well, this is very innocent. There's not, I mean, it's just an app. Well, downloaded it. She started playing it for a little while, and she has monitored time, and there's things that we put in place. Well, one day I
Sure.
was just watching her play it in those early days and just trying to understand what it looks like, and it has a chat feature. Why does an app designed for a kid as a coloring page have a chat feature? And with again, nothing that she was doing wrong.
Right.
Someone chatted with her and they sent a chat message to her, and it was like, why does this app need this? And why would someone be reaching out to someone else on a coloring book app? And it shows kind of some of the problems that exist as parents,
Yeah.
that we have to understand what our kids are doing. Our kids need to understand what they're doing, and what these apps have as part of their features and stuff. Because sometimes we're just like, yeah, it's cool. It's a coloring page app, right? But it has some of those features that predators could use to start to groom and start to exploit children, and we need to understand it. And last thing I'll say on this point is,
Mm-hmm.
9 out of 10 times, well, I'd say even higher, 99% of the time that a child is on these apps, they're doing 100% of the things that their parents ask them to do. They're being 100% safe. They're playing, they're being great, they're not looking out. They don't get on these apps to say, man, today I want to be exploited. That's not what they're doing. They're
Right.
playing it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And the predator is the individual who's trying to exploit. They're coming into that app trying to exploit, trying to take advantage of these individuals, these children. And these children are doing everything that they're supposed to. They're using it the right way. And these individuals are the ones who the fault is on. Not on the kids, not on the individuals who get exploited and manipulated.
Right.
It's on that predator.
Right. Well, Fantastic information, Tyson. Thank you so much for being here and helping educate the audience, and also hopefully encouraging them to help out in this cause. We're really glad to be partnering with our underground or Operation Underground Railroad for this, and we really appreciate the work that y'all do.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to come and to present and to tell more people about it. That's when we're going to have the biggest impact. Us as an organization, we can't do it alone. The problem's too big, like we've talked about today. It takes everyone, and so we appreciate you using the circle of influence that you have. You know, that's where it starts, and helping to spread that word, letting people know the realities of the problem, ways to become part of the solution. So we appreciate you in wanting to join us in this fight.
And also wanted to mention you have a righteous beard, brother. So I got a little
Thank
beard
you.
envy there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it takes a lot of work, and but it's become part of my identity. I don't think I could get rid of it.
yeah. Well, if you ever have to go to a ZZ Top concert, you'll fit right in.
Yeah, I get that. That's the most common one I get is ZZ Top.
All right. Well, it's good to talk to you, and best of luck in all your endeavors in this organization. We really appreciate the work that you do there.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tyson. That was Tyson Wright, who is the education manager for Operation Underground Railroad. And we certainly appreciate him being generous with his time and coming by to educate us a little bit there. So that's going to be it for us. And we're going to go ahead and get into the live stream. We'll be right back after this quick break.